think of probably for her entire life, and I think it's just really amazing to have people like her who have continued to work with the community over many years on campaigns like the Living Wage campaign, but all sorts of stuff, and I think it's really wonderful to have her involved. So I'll leave it to her. I will leave it to her to start us off, and I will sort of figure out the mic situation. We've got two mics going.
So can you hear me?
We did the same
Thank
thing.
you so much, Laura. That's like the nicest thing anyone's ever said. So, and right back at you, because Laura has been a real inspiration as an activist. So I do want to thank her and also Joy Johnson, all the FAR folks, the Chicago invasion, everyone who's out here. It is about collective action. So as Laura said, I'm Susan Freeman. I teach at UVA. And I feel like I should begin by saying that I understand that affiliation not as blind loyalty or as just passivity, I can put my head down and do my work, but really as an obligation to make UVA be a good employer and a good neighbor. And as Brandon said, we've got a long history of not doing that and of owing the community. So this is all about reparation. Also, as Laura said, my own background really is in living wage activism, so I am learning a lot and really grateful to be with a panel of people who can teach me so much. This is a panel about students and student housing. I think we're a college town, students are pivotal. They can compete for affordable housing. Student housing can encroach on neighborhoods. Students are the patrons of those new breweries that keep popping up. But also, as JR said, students are a real activist resource, especially after the summer. Students are really, really galvanized. So I would second what JR said in terms of really taking advantage of the student energy. They're the ones who can hold the university accountable. So without further ado, we're going to be speaking in the order in which people are sitting here. They've all got long, wonderful bios, so I am going to abbreviate them. Tony Romano, immediately to my left, is the organizing director at Right to the City Alliance. He's been organizing for 25 years, initially as a labor organizer. In '99, he co-founded the Miami Workers Center, and since then he's been organizing around land and housing justice. So his co-worker is Kenitha Patterson. She is to his left. She is a Nashville native and an organizer with Homes for All Nashville, an association of tenants who are fighting back against displacement. They help form tenant unions. They work to raise awareness about the challenges that tenants face. They help their neighbors work together and fight back against problem landlords. Kenitha got involved based on her own experience. And so after that, she really wanted to join the fight to prevent other families from going through what she and her family had gone through. Next up is Mike Callahan. He is a principal planner with EPR, which is a Charlottesville-based planning and engineering consulting firm. He's got a wide range of experience in integrated transportation, land use planning, public outreach, writing and facilitation. He's worked with government at the federal level, state level, and local level. After Mike, we'll be hearing from Andrew Carl. He is an associate professor of history and African American studies at UVA. He focuses on social, economic, and environmental history of land use, real estate development, and racial inequality in the 20th century US. He's written 2 books. One is called Free the Beaches, the story of Ned Cull and the battle for America's most exclusive shoreline, and also The Land Was Ours, How Black Beaches Became White Wealth in the Coastal South. And then closing out, Harold Foley, who has been organizing for 15 years in the Virginia and Charlottesville area. So he strives to make changes throughout the community to make them better, especially for inner city youth. He coordinated the West Haven After School program for 8 years. He is currently an organizer with Legal Aid, with an emphasis on police accountability. I actually know him through his organizing with Virginia Organizing, where he worked on such issues as tax reform, restoration of voting rights, ban the box, and living wage. So let's give a hand to all our panelists. And I'll turn things over to Tony.
Thank you. How y'all doing? Good. Can you hear me? All right. So first, I want to give a big thank you for inviting us up. I want to say thank you for inviting us up here. It is a real honor. We do not have any members right now in Virginia, but we have deeply admired the work, particularly of the public housing residents, and how strong they are and how they, in many ways, are leading the country with their victories. And we look forward to building with y'all and not having this be the last time we see you. So with that, let me give a little background. I work with Right to the City, which is a national alliance of community groups, and we're the alliance that birthed and is supporting the Homes for All campaign. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Homes for All campaign. Next slide. Great. So we are, sometimes we say national, but we really use the word translocal because we believe in building power. The first important critical place is locally, right? And then it's national, but it's national in that we connect across community, across city, across states, across the country, and that's how we're national. So we're translocal. We have 69 different grassroots groups around the country in 39 states and 39 cities and 25 states. And we organize, our name really embodies what we're about. We really believe in housing as a human right, and we believe every single person, because they exist, have a right to a home and a decent, affordable, quality home. So that's our goal, that's what we believe in, and that means in the housing movement, for us, the people who really need to be in leadership are those who are catching the most hell and who are really impacted. So for us, that's working class people of color. And that includes public housing residents need to be in the leadership, tenants in private buildings, manufactured home park residents, low-income homeowners, who we often call bank tenants. So the different members of Homes for All come from all those different sectors, and we try to work together. The folks who are members of Homes for All generally work in one or more of three areas. One is renters' rights, so they're either building tenant unions or fighting landlords for victories, or they're fighting for laws across a city or a state, like rent control. The second area is development without displacement, which I think we'll be talking a little bit about today, where folks are in a community that's facing gentrification, so they're organizing to fight for development without displacement, that they lead, as you heard from JR and other folks. And finally, the third area of work, which is the smallest but very, very important, is community control of land and housing. That's where folks collectively own the land and have control over the housing too. And mostly our folks do that through community land trust. So let me dive in. Next slide. So before we talk about or do anything, we believe it's very important to be clear on your vision and your principles. And that vision and those principles undergird every single thing we do. No matter how minute of a thing we're dealing with, our vision should be there and our principles should be there. And our vision, like I said, is housing is a human right. And we have 5 principles, which I'm going to hit briefly, but we could go more into later, that we believe those 5 principles have to be embodied and practiced in order to actually realize housing is a human right? So first principle, and critical to all the others, is community control, right? And we can talk more about what that means. For us, it's ownership, collective ownership. It's democratic participation of everyone who's there. And it's actually systems of education and training so we can learn the model. After community control, there's affordability. And that's mostly what people talk about when they think of housing. They're like, the one thing they talk about is affordability. We talk about affordability, but we talk about it in a different way in terms of so that every single person can have access to it. And when we talk about affordability, we've learned in this country, you better define what you're talking about. 0 to 30% of NMI. Don't talk about affordable. right? Let's talk about 0 to 30% NMI. After affordability, there's permanence, right? Even where there's affordable housing, if it's gonna expire in 10 years and go market, doesn't mean a damn thing, right? Long-term for our children and grandchildren. We want permanence, in perpetuity, at a minimum 99 years. Inclusivity. Inclusivity is the question of race. We understand that white supremacy and racism has determined and shaped every single policy in this country from the beginning of time. When land was stolen from the Native Americans, when black folk were forced to be slaves, and the land was taken from them and never, you know, and has continually been taken from them over time. So this means very concrete policies for us. If we're gonna fight for affordable housing, we're gonna say 0 to 30% of NMI, and we're gonna say you're gonna have to implement policies to make sure it's not racist. What does that mean? Don't use criminal background checks, right? Don't exclude former incarcerated folks. Don't use eviction records to keep people out. Don't look at immigrant status, right? These things are what people are using to implement white supremacy. So we gotta be very explicit about that. And finally, there's health and sustainability, right? So the buildings where you live have to foster your health. And we're gonna talk about that more in a little bit. So next slide. So with that vision in mind, we do believe that before we go out and really are able to fight effectively, we have to understand what we're fighting. The analogy I use, if someone's sick, right, and you rush out to treat them, and you treat them as if they have a cold and they have cancer, I don't care how much effort you put into it. I don't care how much you care, right? You're not gonna heal that person. So we better know what we're fighting. We know this housing system is sick, right? But we need to understand exactly what's going on, right? So we can then fight it effectively. So I'm gonna talk about that a little bit. The housing crisis, there's 4 aspects, and we work nationally. So these 4 things I see happening in every city we're in. So I wanted to throw them out and see if y'all think they're happening here, right? So one, there's a growing number of renters, because people can't afford to buy homes, right? And people who have homes have had them taken from them because they're foreclosed. So the number of renters is growing astronomically. There is a huge shortage of affordable homes. So, you know, it's like 1 in 7 or something, people who need an affordable home can get it. There's a huge shortage. 3, there is rising rents and declining wages. So rents we see going up constantly. Wages, no. Wages and income are stagnant or even declining. And finally, HUD cuts. Whatever housing we do have, the public house is under attack and we're losing it. So these 4 things create a very serious crisis. Are they all happening here? Yes. Okay. And this is one reason, if you're diagnosing something, if it's a problem just in your pinky, right, then you're gonna treat it differently than if it's running through the entire body. So because we understand what's happening is national, we really see the causes as systemic and wanna deal with them that way. So, real quick, the consequences we see in every city we're in, I wanna see if this rings true to y'all. So 1, mass displacement. So renters are being displaced and evicted. We believe there's an eviction epidemic. 7,400 at a minimum are being evicted every day in this country, right? So there's mass displacement. Low-income homeowners are displaced at very high rates because of rising taxes, right? Even if you own your home outright. Next, unaffordable rents. So rents are going up, so we have more and more people that are paying significant amounts, like 50, 60, 70% of their income to housing. And finally, people are suffering, right? There's health and physical impacts. Suicide rates are up, so people don't talk about it, but there's real suffering going on. Next slide. I'm gonna move a lot quicker because I'm very behind. And then we can talk more details in the sessions. So when we look at analyze the system, we say it's systemic, and we feel the U.S. housing system is flawed, and that there are solutions that can address that. And fundamentally, it's about this housing system is driven by profit. And housing and land are commodities first and foremost, and people are put second, and that's the fundamental problem. Next slide. So given this diagnosis, we believe the solution is we need a movement, and we need a powerful movement led by people of color and working class people who are most impacted. That movement, we believe, has to get to scale, and that's something we haven't been able to do. We not only need to be in every city, but a critical mass of those people who are impacted have to be organized. If y'all have 10,000 tenants who are facing eviction and having unaffordable rents, y'all gotta have 1,000, 2,000 of them organized, right? Not just one rep from every place, right? You gotta really have deep organizing, and we can talk more about that. So let's get to University of Virginia really quick. Universities in this country, every city we work in, developers and governments work together as gentrifying forces, right? And every single place that we know of where a university has changed their attitude has come through struggle, has come through a fight. So one example, we have a group in Sage in Los Angeles that University of Southern California was encroaching, taking land, forcing folks out. So they engaged, they led the effort, built a coalition, and fought and actually won a very significant agreement that included $20 million for affordable housing and some security to help prevent people from being displaced, right? That's not an end-all and be-all, but that victory happened through struggle. I'll give you an example. In Atlanta, Georgia State University has just been handed 80 acres of land in downtown Atlanta, which is surrounded by historic black communities. The university has said they're not going to talk to the community, and they've refused to even negotiate. So we're in a big fight there. And the reason is they don't value those communities. Black communities don't matter. Black lives don't matter, black communities don't matter. There's no value. So if everyone's displaced and they build beautiful buildings and white people come in, for them that's an improvement, right? If they wipe everyone out and build student housing. So there's a difference in value and vision, right, that we got to struggle around. But that's happening, and we don't have a CBA yet in Georgia, and we're fighting, and it's going to take, we've had a tent city, and we're going to have to do a lot more things to win from Georgia State University. Next slide. Okay. So real quick, a lot of people say this is the best system there is, work with it. We actually think there's a lot of solutions. And it's not rocket science, and it's not complicated. 4 solutions that we know work and stop displacement and allow people to live with affordable rents are: 1, rent control, right? Rent control works. Now, when y'all tell me with 20 we have the Dillon rule, right? I'm going to tell you so do most states in this country. So do us in Georgia. You can fight and win rent control tomorrow. Let me tell you how you do it. You build a tenant union, you fight your landlord, and you get a contract that says the rent won't be raised in 5 years. Is that a form of rent control? Right? You do that in 100 buildings, you have an army, and then you go fight for rent control, right? You got to go to the state. We start local, but then you got to build across cities. Y'all got to go to other cities and help them build if they aren't. So you build in every city, and then y'all come together and go out to the state and destroy the Dillon rule, right? When public housing residents fight to save public housing, that's rent control. That's a form of rent control. They're saving buildings, right? So it can be done. Next, low-income homeowners fight and win a law that says you can't raise their property taxes if you've been a resident for so long, right? And that works, right? And it's a fight to win that, but that's something that works. Preserve all existing affordable housing, and finally, community control of land, creating land trust is a powerful solution, because when we win that those homes are permanently affordable. So, and finally, like I said, it takes a movement, and we can talk more about this. Kanisha's going to share Kanitha's going to share a concrete example in Nashville of where this is happening. It's going to take a movement, right? It's not a win-win, if you ask us, right? A win-win means we get a crumb, right? What we want to win is not 1 or 2 people staying in the community, but every single person that wants to stay there stays there. I'll end with that.
Get this over me. Be careful.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, as Tony said about the model with Homes for All Nashville, we've grown vastly over 2 years. In one neighborhood that has pioneered the fight,
So can you hear? Can't, if you need to talk,
okay.
talk right into it.
Sorry about that, y'all. Is that better? That's way better. Okay. I can hear me now. All right. We've grown vastly over the course of 2 years, which that's Homes for All Nashville. There's been one neighborhood that's pioneered the fight, which I'll get into more of that in just a moment. But with them pioneering the fight, we ultimately want to be a hub for all tenant associations across the city, across the entire city. This will help the residents be able to teach each other and learn from each other and shape the way rents and policy goes for their own community. They'll be able to see the results, which, like I said, I'll talk about that in just a moment with the pioneering neighborhood. The crisis in Nashville. In Nashville, more than half of all renters are paying more than a third of their income on rents alone. Since 2011, rents have risen almost 70% while wages remain or have grown only by 14%. This is not a small-scale side issue. The lack of affordable housing affects majority of Nashvillians. With the tenant union wins, that's the next slide. Our founding Nashville Tenant Union, the Park at Hillside, which that's where she explained in my situation that I was displaced from. I didn't know in the midst of being displaced what was going on, but I was essentially by myself and my neighbors, we weren't organized. So having a tenant union brings power in numbers. So what the residents at Park at Hillside did, after the sale of the property, which get the dollars, the dollar tag for the sale was $20 million. So, and my expectation within that, probably from the owners, would have been to just get everybody out. But with the tenant association being in place, they came together and wrote a letter that started negotiations with the owners. So now they can't get rid of them. It's a total of 290 units right now, so they have agreed to put that same amount of affordable housing back into the new development. So at least they've secured that, and they're in further negotiations about the affordability of it, and also like community amenities and what they would like the community to look like. And they also have the backing of many neighborhood associations, like the homeowners around the community. So building that momentum and the fight is coming along very well. And the neighbors, once they heard about the situation, they knew that it would spell displacement, and they're very upset. So we talked with the council person for the city, and that's who we negotiate through him, because he's up for re-election. That's leverage. And also with the owners. So everybody kind of on their end has to make the neighborhood happy. So we're kind of at an advantage. They've been able in the past to fix long-standing maintenance issues, rent hikes. The rent now cannot exceed $35 per year increase. They had a situation where it did go up, but immediately we were able to communicate that and get it changed back, because it's not supposed to exceed the $35. So that's a big win. Let's see. I'm trying to make sure I get everything out. Yeah, okay. And that's it as far as the tenant wins. They've got a lot of things they're working on. They're actually about to have a block party where they could bring the neighborhood out and kind of fundraise towards stuff that they want to go to as far as public education. So it's a lot of exciting things going on within the tenants unionizing and coming together as an association. As far as policies, that's the next slide. Yeah. When in policies, we're a part of two other interests, a coalition path, which is People's Alliance of Transit, Housing, and Employment. And then also we're a part of a movement that's across the entire city of Nashville. This includes grass top organizations, nonprofits, and grassroots, with the common goal of true affordable housing, because we hear affordable housing all the time, but it's not really the same definition. And I heard a lot of that with the people that were speaking from Chicago and Virginia. So it sounds like it's going across the states of what's going on with that true affordable meaning. So we want housing stock that people can actually attain, community land trust and citywide. The community land trust needs to be citywide and not concentrated to one particular place, just concentrating poverty further. And also a community land bank is what we're working on as far as ordinances and resolutions and policy right now. After 2 years, I'm on the last slide. So the Homes for All Southern Assembly, after 2 years of building, Nashville will host the first assembly following its creation last year. And it was created under Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, and Kentucky. And we want to take the movement. We need everybody there to build so we could take the movement across the entire South. Here in Charlottesville, like I said, just in one night, I witnessed such phenomenal tenant and ally organizing. Plus hearing about Section 3 CLTs and CLBs, which is community land trusts and community land banks, which I just mentioned. We're just starting out with that stuff. So learning more about that across the cities and states. We need to learn from each other as the South, eradicating the barriers of economic disadvantage and making sure everyone can access fair and safe housing. And that's it.
All right, I'll adjust this up. I always have to do that. 6'2". Hey everybody, thank you for being here, and thank you for inviting me. Laura, great job organizing this. Really such an important conversation that's going on today, and I really enjoyed the remarks I heard here, and I think I'm going to more build on them a little bit. I was going to make some very similar points, but my role here is to represent kind of the city planning perspective. I've been a city planner for a decade, have municipal experience in the city of Raleigh, North Carolina, the town of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Boston Regional Planning Organization, and now I'm a consultant to local governments all over the country, especially under contracts to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, providing technical assistance. So I've worked in about 50 cities and towns in 20 states over the last 6 years, and kind of bring a national perspective as a planner. And so some of the things I wanted to share is just, I was asked by Laura to talk a little bit about the role of the planner in this, and also just give you a few insights into how planners work and some of the really important things to be considering as you're working on this important issue. First of all, a planner's role, pretty simple. It's to inject long-term thinking into decisions we're making in the present. I mean, it's kind of as simple of a definition as it gets. We do this with plans, we do this with policies. The city of Charlottesville has a comprehensive plan. That's actually, I believe, maybe there's someone here from the city that can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's being updated right now. There's actually public meetings going on. I think in May there's going to be one in this very room. And I'd really encourage you, to get involved, because those discussions in the comprehensive plan are about where do we grow and how do we grow and develop the city. And that's so important for the folks in this room to have a voice and to get involved. I think I was looking at some of the draft policies and goals that are in that plan this morning, and I think there's a lot that we'd all agree with in there. The key is kind of making sure it actually gets done. There's so much in a comp plan, it's easy to lose sight. And there can be some internal conflicts within a comprehensive plan as well, and inconsistencies, but I think it's important to make sure the right things are in that plan, and also are carried out. Another important thing, I think, is zoning versus policy. Zoning, I understand, I unfortunately have been on dad duty in the morning today, so I wasn't here earlier. I'm here now, and I'll be here this afternoon, but I know zoning came up a lot. I would really caution against focusing too much on the zoning of the city at the exclusion of the policy. Zoning's not policy, zoning's law. Zoning says this is what you can do with your property, how you can use it, and it has dimensional requirements, setbacks, heights, densities, etc. Policy is what's in the comp plan. So comp plans have a general land use map or a future land use map, and that is a statement of intent. What is the city going to be in the future? And so when someone comes in and says, I want to build housing, I want to build multifamily housing, and I want to rezone this property to do it, the city's going to look at its policies, it's going to look at its future land use map and other things. But so I think it's important to be focused on this level, what's happening now, the comprehensive plan and the policies that are in it. Zoning's important too, but it really isn't everything. I know this conference is about kind of diagnosing and also a proposal. So I'll talk a little bit about, from a planner's perspective, what are things that we think about. When I was in the city of Raleigh, I had the pleasure of working at that time under Mitchell Silver. Don't know if anybody knows that name, but he's the former planning director of the city of Raleigh. He's now the Parks Commissioner for New York City. And he was former president of the American Planning Association. So he's a really important figure in the profession. And he always said, we have to have a vision. You're talking about a vision. And a vision requires both hindsight and foresight. And it's always stuck with me because I think it's so important. And so as we're diagnosing what's going on in the community, it's important to keep some of the historical things in mind. It's how we got to where we are today. Several mentioned by Tony, and I know the other guests here are going to be talking about this, but we have a history of very unjust housing policies, laws, and lending practices that have really created a bad situation. We had redlining, which was essentially on maps outlining in red where banks weren't going to lend. Often those were African American communities. That was really facilitated by the federal government. And so it's important to recognize that. Urban renewal, of course, the story of Vinegar Hill is told a lot in this community, but that's a big part of the history. And deed restrictions. I lived in the Locust Grove neighborhood, and my neighbor bought property, moved in. He said, gosh, my deed restrictions said the house could only be sold to white people. That's unenforceable, of course. It has been since the 40s, but it's still in deeds, still carried forward into deeds to this day. And